Do you listen to your podcasts with Stitcher? Well, many people like to, and now Notebook on Cities and Culture is available on it. Find out more about what Stitcher is and does at Stitcher.com. It's a smartphone app. Season 3 of Notebook on Cities and Culture is brought to you by Carl Haley and Daniel Murphy. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Diego Rabasa of Sexto Piso Press earlier, a few episodes ago on this show, which is, to me, as someone who reads Spanish language novels, it seems more exciting now to read Spanish novels than ever. It seems like they're in an exciting time. Do you think that's true? Is Spanish language literature getting more exciting?
Well, I agree with Diego. I think it's a good time for Spanish language, especially in Latin America, I would say. I think there are interesting things happening, of course, here in Mexico, in Argentina, Chile, Colombia also has interesting writers, young writers. So yes, of course, I think it's a good moment for writers and for publishing houses in Latin America because of the obvious Spanish difficult moment, I would say.
The difficult moment, that's an interesting way of putting it. Well, we'll get into that in just a second. I'll announce it is Notebook on Cities and Culture. I'm Colin Marshall, sitting down here on Saturday morning in Colonia, Roma, over coffee with Brenda Lozano, who is an essayist and a novelist. She's contributed to publications like Letras Libres and others. Her first novel has been out for a few years. It's Todo Nada. She's working on a new one. And Brenda, we talked earlier about how when growing up, you were given a lot of literature in school from Spain. It was all from Spain. Is that true?
Yes, I studied in an English school, so my approach to literature was in English. I learned to read in English I learned to read in English, and
Do you remember what books you liked in English early on? Like when?
Of course, Colin.
Yes. Well, tell me some of these English language books that, even though it was not your native language, though you started speaking early, what books sort of jumped out through that to really excite you?
Yeah. Well, I remember this Ladybird collection, which I started reading, and I had this Mr. Coffee professor who loved Shakespeare and Oscar Wilde. So it was really funny because we were 7 years old and learning by heart Shakespeare and, this tragic...
And the language couldn't have made sense to you at that time.
He was really sweet and he was passionate for literature, so he explained us the complexity in a word, or... So it made, I don't know, Mr. Coffee, I owe something to this man. And he taught us also he introduced us to Oscar Wilde. He has really nice stories for children, and like The Happy Prince. And so, well, yes, I started that. But when I was a little bit older, I don't know, probably high school, I started to read in Spanish, and I started to read,
So you picked up Spanish language literature later?
Later?
You started with English language literature,
yes.
And then you said, maybe I'll try reading Spanish language novels?
Yes, I feel guilty saying this. Yes, I don't like to say this, actually. But yes, that's the way it happened. I didn't... for a while I didn't live in Mexico, so basically I started reading Spanish literature not for school, let's say.
Extracurricular reading.
Yeah, but yes, in when you get there, when you get to Spanish, of course, all the Spanish publishing houses were dictating in a way, in a good way, what we all read.
So what they wanted to publish in Spain, that's what you read?
Yeah, I think, well, in my generation, the Spanish publishing houses were for example, if you saw when I was, I don't know, 15, 16, 17, seeing this, there are two big independent houses in Spain, Tusquets and Anagrama. So walking in a bookstore and seeing their catalog, it was enough to know it was a good book. Like, it was a guarantee of something.
The fact that these houses published these books meant this is going to be good to read. I'll read this.
Yes.
You can't do that in America so much. The publishers don't mean much.
Well, yeah, but probably because well, for example, New Directions, I would pick, closing my eyes, I would pick a book published by New Directions. But Anagrama and Tusquets are in a way like New Directions, I don't know. Or, I don't know, the equivalent. Because these independent houses were made by these people who were against, of course, Franco, and that were really young when all this was happening, and were loved to read and were passionate for literature, and so they are interesting people, you know. They are not just selling the television or.
They have reasons to be publishing.
They're intellectuals, and they grew up fighting against the dictadura, and I think they're really interesting people. They're good readers, and in a way their catalog is like a book, no? It's like they chose all those chapters, and for my generation, those publishing houses were crucial, were really, really important for.
You had to look to the Spanish publishing houses, but now your country, Mexico, is getting interesting publishing houses itself, is it not?
And again, I think it has to do with what's happening in Spain right now. Spain has always had an important role in what we read in Spanish. And it still does, of course. But it happened, I don't know, it's a moment where all these new publishing houses in Latin America have a good chance. And I guess in the next 5 or 10 years it will start to bloom.
So this is the very beginning.
Well, of the new, I mean, the ones that are run by people about my age, or yes, I think in the next 5 or 10 years they will be very strong. They are starting, and some of them have already between 5 and 10 years, no? In Argentina, in Chile, and in Mexico. But I think that they need a longer life, let's say.
When you began reading both English language and Spanish language novels, when you began enjoying both, what did you think of as the difference? How were they different? The ways that the enjoyment you got out of English language literature and the enjoyment out of Spanish, how was it different?
That's a beautiful question. I've never come. Wow. Probably joy has to do with doing it, not only with language. No? I mean, what you enjoy is reading or writing or whatever, or eating, but bring it to a teenage to a teenage example. I don't enjoy more eating Italian food or Japanese food. It's like eating what what gives you pleasure, no?
That makes sense. It's the act, not where it happens to come from.
Exactly. I think it's the act, and there, of course, it's a different world as Japanese food. and Italian food, no? They're different, and behavior and language behaves in a different way, and in a way they behave like animals, no? Like English is a different animal. It's very different from Spanish. If they were animals, they would be in different episodes in Discovery Channel, I would say. That the natures are different. But it doesn't mean that a tiger is more beautiful than a panther, or I don't know, I'm getting a bit too poetic and cheesy, but but I think what you enjoy is doing it, or the act of reading. So.
And speaking of the act of writing, do you remember when you realized that becoming a writer was a possibility for you?
I like your questions. I like them because even though we're having a coffee, it's like having a tequila really early on a Saturday morning. I think it also relates to the act of reading. When Amos Oz has a very sweet or nice anecdote in an essay against fanatism, where he recalls when he was a student, like in elementary, primary school. Well, he was a little boy, and a nurse comes inside in the classroom and closes the door and goes to the blackboard with a chalk and draws, the reproductive system. This is boys, this is girls. Okay, boys, this is how it works, and reveals all the mysteries of life. And then Amos Oz says, he writes in his essay something like, well, when I saw that, when the nurse drew all these things and explained how it worked, I didn't really know how someone will do something like that. I mean, I didn't understand why men and women would, But when I went to university, he says, I understood that the nurse forgot to say that there was pleasure on that act. And there's something really, coming back to your question, is something similar, because when you discover pleasure, when you're a teenager, or I don't know, when you discover pleasure on the act of reading, or it's like next to the act of writing. Well, for me, so it's like the discovery of pleasure, of how do you spend a good time doing what. So knowing that I like to read and write came about the same age. Like, of course, it's terrible, and I don't know, teenagers, I don't know, they produce probably hair and poems, no? It's like you feel free and full of life, and you think you will change the world by publishing a magazine or whatever, no? So, I don't know. I think it came about the same age when I discovered the pleasure in reading and writing.
You grew up here in Mexico City, and I wonder, growing up here in the city that seems like the literary center of Mexico, was that encouraging? Is it like a literary environment living in this city? Did you feel that?
Well, the good thing is that you have UNAM. You can go to the library there, and I mean, when you're younger, or even now, there are lots of bookstores, friends, and I mean, in the way you end up having good conversations, and all those things help. Even parties, I mean, like, all those things help to... It's not only literature, it's not only as a poet, well, no, as a writer, said, it's not only... he says something, Gombrowicz, he says something against poets. And even though I'm a good reader of poetry and I really like poetry, and I think it's a very good moment in poetry for young Mexican poets. Well, he says that he doesn't like poetry because he says it's like eating a sugar, like directly with no...
Just eating pure sugar.
Yeah, pure sugar. And he says, no, I like narrative because it's like having a coffee with some sugar in it. Like it's diluted or...
It's not so straight, it gives you... It's not so harsh.
Yeah. So I wouldn't use that example for poetry because I like reading poetry. But I would use that example for when you're discovering reading and writing and in terms of a literary environment, because it's not only like the pure sugar, no, it's also the parties, it's also singing a Radiohead song out loud, it's also, I don't know, this, for example, I find this really important, no, to be curious with movies, with music, with art.
All culture.
Yes, of course, like going to exhibitions, art exhibitions, going to the worst party you can ever imagine and talking about the most superficial and stupid thing. And I think these things are also important for writing, not only like the sugar or the libraries or... I mean...
Mexico City offers all these things, doesn't it? From the culture to the bad parties, there's so much of all of it. You hear, right?
Yeah, of course. And there's a very good and vast offer in bad parties and terrible conversations and singing out loud Jose Jose or whatever, no? So yeah, you can... I think that's also important. Not only like, the sugar.
When you became a published writer and started writing essays, what subjects did you most enjoy writing essays about when your essays began to be available to the public?
Something that something that I find interesting in that moment. I don't know. When I was reading Balzer, I read all Robert Balzer from the beginning to the end.
It's hard to resist.
Yeah. So, or when I read Josefina Vicens, I read her twice. Like it's, I don't know, probably a compulsive or an obsessive way of reading, but...
You want to know the author completely, though.
Yeah, like when you taste something, you want to taste more, and... No, I love... Let's say if you go to a restaurant and you say, whoa, this is amazing, I want the dessert, I want to come next week, I want to come the next week too, so...
You had the freedom early on writing essays to write about whatever you wanted to write about.
Yeah, sure.
How did you get that? Usually when someone starts writing, they get assignments and the editor says...
Of course it all starts like that. But probably I was lucky. I have had very good conversations and editors who... Of course, we always do things that, I don't know, I would prefer to write on something else, but you end up writing about. But it's all part of the same. No? I don't know. When you start growing or when you grow, you are more free to choose things. But when you're 22, 23 and they assign something that you don't really like, it's fun. I don't know.
You can find a way to make it personal to you.
Yeah, personal, and it's important. I think I hate the word important because what is important? But I'm now saying this word once.
Sometimes you need that word.
Yeah. Well, but actually, I think yes, I would use it now with all the. Terrible and the good part of the word. I think it's important to know or to find a way to have a good time, even if you are wherever you are. And that applies, of course, in writing and reading. I mean, curiosity, I think it's a flexible word, and you should, well, this is the way I think. I mean, you should be able to have a good time anywhere.
It's your challenge to have a good time. It's not the place, it's not the work, it's not the food. You have to find a way to enjoy it.
Because, for example, I'm reading right now a book that I don't know if I really want to read right now, because it's a bit depressive, and I know it's kind of stupid to say I don't want to feel sad, but actually this weekend I don't want to feel sad, but I think it's okay, but there's something in that voice that I'm interested in, and I don't mind that it's, I know, a topic that I don't want to see right now for personal reasons, but there's something interesting there. So having a good time, as we were talking before, I don't think it's something about laughing or smiling or celebrating, or I don't know. Party it's a complex word, and you can have a good time like thinking or underlining a phrase, or there's several ways to have a good time. So writing something that, I don't know, probably you would prefer to write about something else, or you could, I don't know, prefer to read something else. But if you're there, it's for a reason, and there's a way where you can hear your voice and, I don't know, get somewhere else, I would say.
I see what you mean. And before recording, we talked a bit about how enjoyable you found the act of writing your first novel, Todo Nada. When did you begin that novel? When did you start writing that? Was there a specific point, or did it just develop out of writing you had done?
I studied literature, Latin American literature, and as a student I wrote a novel when I was like 20, or let's say from 20 to 23 or something. I spent like 3 years writing a terrible novel.
Terrible, huh?
Terrible novel.
What was wrong with it?
Me, the novel, both. It was, and especially I was not having a good time. That was the thing. So when I finished that, I thought about it and I started reading it, and I said, whoa, I would never give this, not even to a friend. So what's wrong with it? I wanted to know what was happening with me and with what I did. So I came to the answer. Then I had like basically two rules. As a student, as nerd as I have been all my life, I didn't want to make an investigation on a subject, and I wanted to have a good time. So they were basically like my two or three things I wanted to work with or to achieve or whatever. And so I threw that to the garbage, erased it from my computer, and I started from zero, like when I was probably, 24, 25. And that's how I started, from the first, from the title, because that was my first phrase, and that's how I like to work with the title, is like a first phrase. And it started like that, like Todo Nada in Spanish. It means something like all and nothing, and it also means like everything's there, like floating. Nadar is also a verb. Swimming, that means swimming. So in the title I could see like two extreme words, and I wanted to work on two extreme characters. I thought that youth was overestimated, and I was 25 myself, and
you felt like youth was overestimated as you were living it.
Yes, I didn't like all that, like walking. I read, but as a reader and as a literature student, and I thought like really stupid to see all these spots and movies and TV shows and everything on like saying that youth was the great thing. And I was 25, and I was saying, why? Youth is not... I mean, I like Borges, I like reading and good things. I don't know, I found that good things were not... I thought that youth, basically, was the opposite. I found it so overestimated.
Youth was the opposite of the things that interested you.
Yes, of course. And I was 25, and so I wanted to work with a character, with an older character, and I thought it's even better. I mean, as you grow up, it's better. I don't really understand why this woman, when I see a woman walking in the street and I see she's dressed as pretending she's 20 years old, younger, or all this makeup or whatever.
Is that common in Mexico?
Yes, of course, everywhere. No, there are crazy people everywhere, and women who want this Dorian Gray syndrome.
I see. Isn't Dorian Gray is like a brand of stockings as well, isn't it? I saw it at Sanborn's the other day. I was like, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a theory on that, on those stockings. I don't understand where's the Dorian Gray in those stockings. Like, where is it? Like, if you buy two pairs, one of them starts to, to destroy.
One pair ages.
Yeah, I don't really get where the Dorian Gray thing is. But anyhow, I don't know, I found it more... When you work with words and with a character, I think that... Well, I thought when I was doing that, because now I'm doing something different, but I thought that you could get to a deeper part of a character with someone who was 72 years old, which is my main character, a grandfather, who was like really extreme, powerful in a way. He's a doctor, he's a gastroenterologist. He's a father, he has 4 children, 4 sons. He's in the top of his medical career. He's successful, and he has this granddaughter who's 25 and who's studying literature. So basically it's like he's saving someone's life while she's in the cinema. I like those opposite and extreme characters for me. And I was interested in him because I think he lost a son. One of his sons died, who is the father of his granddaughter. So he has lost a son, and he has lost his wife. He's about to die, basically. And I thought that there were more phrases and more character in someone like that. Because after pain, after all the joy, after all the success, after everything, my question was, what happens with words? Those are not the words from a 25-year-old who wants that wants to find weed and that wants to find, to talk about the new Tom York video or whatever. I thought I was more interested on what a 70-year-old character, as I wanted him to be, wanted to say. I don't know, I found it more deep, that you could get to deeper places there. But again, I was 25, so I didn't know. It was too pretentious to write in first person or third person, just from his point of view or just describing him. So walking around here, around this neighborhood, I thought, well, what if he has a granddaughter and I feel more comfortable, like, okay, I'm 25, but I'm interested in him. So that was my way of making him speak or a way of creating this character that I wanted to be.
You had to go through a character more like you so you could reveal this 70-year-old who, I mean, you still had the challenge of creating the 70-year-old. You still had to get into his consciousness. I mean, how did you, or I guess I'll put it this way, where did you look for examples of how a character like this grandfather would be? Because he's an interesting character and he's very unusual, which is, I think, partially what intrigues his granddaughter about him. But what in life inspires that kind of character?
Some aspects, of course, of my own grandfathers, and about something when I was walking in the street and I heard something, or talking with a friend and he said something and I thought, oh, that's something like a 70-year-old would say, or myself, like when you're inside that, or when I was inside that story, I was always imagining what would he say, how would he act, how would he react, and I really liked his character, like something like I wanted to be, like I would never be a doctor, a 72-year-old doctor, like really successful and like super macho, you know, from another. Just like some of our grandfathers were, like the woman's always in the kitchen, and they just
traditional.
Yeah, really traditional and squared. And
do you see a big gap, a big difference between the older people in Mexico and the younger ones? You know, the 70-year-olds and the 25-year-olds. Do they come from different worlds in more so than other places?
Of course. Yeah. Yeah, well, several of us come from families who came to Mexico City, so it depends where did they came from. And so, as in the U.S., it's the same, no? Like probably the third generation as us were born here, but my grandparents didn't. And my parents were raised in a different context and with different ideals, and I come from a traditional family. I have 5 uncles and aunties from each side. I don't know. So yeah, big families, and my grandmother, if she went to elementary and primary school, probably that was it. But my grandfathers didn't, no? They worked and they provided and they had these massive houses and they supported the family, and so it's not how we live right now. I don't know, like I went to university, so it's different. Of course it's different, and there's a big gap on what university gives you and not having children at 17 gives you, and no?
It's true. I'm fascinated by people our age in Mexico right now, like our generation, because they seem to be doing all sorts of interesting things, and they seem to be making such a break from recent generations. Do you know what I mean? Like, it seems the people our age now seem so different from their parents. Do they actually seem that way, or is that just me from a foreign perspective thinking that's the case?
No, I think you're totally right. But how would you explain that? I mean, why is it happening? Or what is it that we are against with? Or I don't know. What you say gives me more questions than answers.
I admit, that's true. But when you're writing novels, do you think of yourself as writing specifically, as contributing to Mexican literature, or just literature in general? Do you think about Mexican literature as a concept, or Latin American literature, or is it just all literature you're writing?
I was having some beers with a friend last night, and we were talking about something similar. I was arguing something similar, and well, first of all, it's difficult to think. Answering your question, I think it's difficult to think in those terms, like I'm writing Mexican literature, or you're just writing, and no, probably.
So you don't think you're following any predecessors in Mexican literature? You don't think of them at all?
It's like it's a tricky question because of course I will say something like a cliché, but if language is a house, then of course you're in the same house. You can't ignore, you can't avoid, that you're in the same house as all our Spanish grandfathers and fathers and aunties and whatever, no? But at the same time, it's like a family, no? Let's get cheesy. But then when you're writing, I think it's good to close the door and focus on what you're doing, because if Borges is knocking at your door, imagine that. Or what can you do?
What would you say to him? It's impossible.
What would you say to someone like Clarice Lispector coming inside your room with a cup of, I don't know.
She's an important writer to you as well, although she wrote in Portuguese, but in translation Can you read Portuguese?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
How easy is it to read to learn Portuguese if you grew up speaking Spanish? I've wondered about this.
Well, the root is the same. Plus, I have Portuguese family, so I like to say that my writer, in a very sentimental way, is Pessoa, the Portuguese poet, because when I was 14 years old, I have an aunt that lives in Lisbon. She gave me as a birthday present a book, a Pessoa book. So I remember being in that birthday party and reading Pessoa, closing the door and reading Pessoa, and my mother knocking the door like, hey, you need to come down and join the party. And I was like, but what is this? What is happening here?
You needed to find out what Pessoa was doing.
It was... Probably it happens in an early age for others, but I relate adolescence with discovery. And I discovered, and it amazed me, when I first read Pessoa when I was 14, something happened. I don't know what to say, but something happened.
It gave you a new perspective on what was possible in literature?
Like something in life changes your point of view or takes you like a few meters and you see things from another perspective, like probably a step, and you see things from another point of view. And in my case, it was literature. It was Pessoa, and I remember thinking, what is this? What is happening? Is this literature? Like, really? What is happening? Where have I been?
You can't quite tell. It's a different form than any other book you had read, certainly, right? I mean, it looks, even the text looks different.
Yeah. So, I don't know if you remember this Jim Jarmusch film, that Ghost Dog.
Oh, of course, yes.
Well, it's like... Yeah, it's like my ghost dog. I don't know. It's like I'm, of course, Forrest Whitaker, and there are several books that for me are Pessoa, especially. It's I entered reading that, so you never forget that. And with good books and with good writers, not in terms of what is good and the good and the bad, but something that moves you. When you continue reading or growing up, 15 years later, it still amazes you, and I don't know, like you keep those.
When we talk about your personal writers that were important to you, like Lispector or Pessoa, I also think of, I talked to Diego Rabasa about this idea that there were once giants in Mexican literature and we all had to pay our respects to them, and now there are more giants. He thinks there are no more giants like that. And I think of the essay you wrote for Letras Libres when you were at the Museo de Cera, the Wax Museum, standing by the wax Octavio Paz, And it's kind of funny because you see these two very different generations of Mexican literature. I mean, how does that feel standing next to a wax Octavio Paz? I mean, was he ever to you an influence, or was he just a titan of Mexican literature that is impossible to ignore?
Well, in that picture, he's like a massive birthday candle, and I don't know if they are giants or not giants, or probably, I don't know, I would need to think more about this, but probably it has to do with a political system that in those days was like the PRI, the party that ruled Mexico for 70 years, that's now again in the power, made things worked in a particular way. Like there was always a father. So Octavio was a father, and then Carlos Fuentes was a father, and it was like this system of powerful men. But now I don't think we have. I agree in that way with Diego that we don't have fathers. Not like that. Not like those days. Not like in the 70s or. Probably it's more equal now, and I don't think we have a father like. We're all probably children or fathers or aunts or whatever, but I don't know. I think it has to do with politics actually, and how the system worked and power. And Octavio Paz had a lot of power and run several. He had several magazines, but now things have changed. If you want to publish, you don't need to go. You don't necessarily need to publish in a magazine. No, there's internet, and there are many ways to do things now. But in the 70s, no. You needed influencers, probably. You needed a magazine. You needed. I don't know what you needed, but things work differently, I think.
Do you consider yourself to be writing within a community of Mexican writers, of Mexico City writers, or is that something you think about?
No, I think I have friends, and it's really good to know that you have things in common with several friends, or having a conversation or some drinks with a friend and talking about it's. For me, it's really valuable to speak and to think about, I don't know, a movie or books, and to find things in common it's a real pleasure, like having a good meal.
To have conversations about culture on a regular basis, that's important to you?
Yes, of course. Well, I just said that as having a good meal, and no. Of course, eating is a main pleasure, but if having a nice meal and talking about general, movie, a book, or it's... Because, of course, there are writers now that I don't really... I'm not fond... I don't know, I don't feel close to their points of view or whatever, but some friends, poets or novelists,
You enjoy having conversations about culture, but do you also enjoy having debates, arguments, getting heated up about these sorts of things? Does that happen?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love. Actually, yes, yeah. And when it happens, it's like it's a good moment. Like I have a couple of friends, and we just saw the same movie, and she loved it, and I don't know, I didn't really like it. So we had a debate on why, no? So I don't know. I enjoy when I receive an email like, I think you're wrong. No?
you get these emails, I think you're wrong, about essays you write?
Oh, no. I'm talking about a movie I saw with a friend.
I see. But you just mentioned when you get emails that say, I think you're wrong. Do you continue these arguments over email later?
Yes.
After? I see.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. I like that.
One of the essays I first read of yours on Letras Libres was about John Fante, the famous writer of Los Angeles, who wrote about the 1930s Los Angeles, yes. And I wonder, reading literature like John Fante's, do you get, this might not make sense, but do you get senses of place from these writers, like when they're so tied in with a city or with a country? Is that a way for you to get a place into your mind, to know a place?
Totally, yes. I like John Fante. I don't like Bukowski, but I love John Fante.
Probably had arguments about Bukowski as well.
Well, yeah. And I get to New LA in the 30s thanks to John Fante, and I like that LA. I like what he writes, and I've never been to Buenos Aires, but I kind of know Buenos Aires because of reading, of course, Borges and Di Benedetto and other Argentinian writers. So, or for example, you get to know Japan by reading Tanizaki and Kawabata, and even Banana Yoshimoto, no? Or younger writers, I would say. But when you go to those places, I mean, when you go to LA, I will go to Buenos Aires soon, so I'll tell you. But in a way, you go, like when you meet someone that is a friend of a friend, and this person says, "Oh, you'll have a good time. It's interesting on this and that." You sort of know this person, but when you go, you feel more comfortable, or I don't know. I think
you are prepared in some sense. It does prepare you in some sense.
Yes. It prepares you, but it gives you more. Like walking in the beach, or going to the sea, or after reading Virginia Woolf, or it's not the same. It's not the same experience. It's not the same experience eating a French dish after reading 15 pages that Virginia Woolf wrote, and this wonderful book on the bay. I don't know how to pronounce that, but there's a French, because English, as you know, English dishes don't give for 15 pages, so Virginia Woolf always went to French food. So it's not the same. I mean, it's not the same reading and then living it. I don't know. It's greater for me. I don't know. I don't know.
When you read other writers write about Mexico City, do you get the sense of recognition, like, oh, that's my city they're writing about. That's the same way I feel about this place, or how much of that is there? Do other writers capture your Mexico City well?
Well, it's difficult when that happens, but yes, of course it happens. What's the last novel I read? Amuleto. Like 2 weeks ago, I read Bolaño's Amulet, which takes place in Mexico City after 68, when, you know, the student movement, and takes place in UNAM, where where my parents studied in those times. I mean, my mom went to Facultad de Filosofía y Letras en la UNAM, and that's the Mexico City he's portraying in a way. So it was nice for me to see this Mexico City in the 70s. My mother probably is Bolaño would be about my mother's age or something. So when he writes about Mexico City in the 70s, in a way I see Mexico City, but a Mexico City that I never lived. And UNAM in the 70s, I don't know how was it. My mother does and my father does, but then reading Bolaño is like seeing Polaroids, or I don't know, like of your family. When he describes Mexico City, I mean,
you don't recognize some element of it. There's a distance,
yes.
Right?
Yes, there's a distance, but in a way it's familiar. Like I gave my mother, of course, I gave her the Savage Detectives. And I said, like, Mom, this is the school where you studied, UNAM, your years, everything, read this. And she said, oh, yeah. She called me one day and she said, my love, this is wonderful. Yes, this is UNAM. But all these people, they do nothing. They would never be my friends, something like that.
After all this time growing up here and everything, is Mexico City still, to you, an exciting place to write?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Absolutely, yes.
I didn't think the answer would be no, but I have to make sure, because it's always exciting to me to come, because I'm a visitor. But when you live here, when you grow up here, it doesn't get dull?
No, especially if you have friends that like adventures, and I don't know, you get you end up in these really weird places, and
there's a few of those here.
Wild,
yes.
Yeah, no.
There's plenty of adventures to be had here. It's true. I've been speaking in Colonia, Roma with essayist and novelist Brenda Lozano, and she's the author of Todo Nada, the novel, and she's got another one in the works, so stay tuned for that. Brenda, thank you so much. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Colin. Muchísimas gracias.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. And special thanks to everybody who backed Season 3 on Kickstarter, including Paige Calvert, Jonathan Crow, Douglas Dollars, Paul Doyle, John French, Eric Graham, Will Graham, Umberto Grant, Kimberly Hahn, Carl Haley, Stefan Halperin, Matt Howie, Andrew Hovenick, Mark Hines, Andy Cooney, Mark Larson, Matthew Lickey, Mr. Munvirzi, Rob Motz, Lindsay Muniak, Daniel Murphy, Aidan Millman, Patrick O'Flaherty, Danny Olson, Michael O'Regan, Blake Riley, Rob Schultz, Cam Smith, Small Demons, Todd Shimoda, Kevin Smokler, Thomas Unterberger, Matt Warren, and Wayne Wright.